HighBridge Audio presents Wigfield, the can-do town that just may not, by Amy Sedaris, Paul Dinello, and Stephen Colbert. Read for you by the authors.
Words cannot describe all the things that I have left to write. Russell Hokes. Dedication. As this book, including this dedication, was written in chronological order, I have, so far, only myself to thank. This is assuming I will continue to be involved. Preface. See Introduction. Introduction. Prior to embarking on the voyage of discovery that is this book, a quick but gripping note about me. My name is Russell Hokes, author, but long before I became a writer, I wasn't one. I worked for the Federal Department of Transportation painting the center lines on interstates. It was rewarding work with the added benefit of being unchallenging. But following a heated dispute with my foreman over the meaning of the word sick day, I quit my job shortly after he fired me. For the first time in my life, I was truly free. But freedom has its price, which I soon found out was money. So, much like a butcher naturally becomes a surgeon, or a boxer becomes a cop, I decided to apply my knowledge of drawing long white lines on asphalt to drawing much shorter ones with loops and curls on paper. In short, words. I became a writer. A writer. The vision of my new life hung before me, encamped, nay, ensconced in my cozy mountain cabin mansion. The fire roaring, the wind howling, the words flowing. I would make a name for myself like Hemingway. My only concern would be finding the time to write with all the skiing, hunting, and hobnobbing with the New York literatica I'd be doing. I'd be rubbing elbows and other sensitive parts with the cultural elite, quipping charmingly to the encircling bevy of literary ingenues. Late nights spent sipping from tankards of slow gin fizzes, raging and railing about the hypocrisies of our times, then on to the next book signing. Another town, another series of women. How long can I keep up this pace? I must get back to my art, my writing. But how can I? I'm sucked dry by the parasites who cling to my every preposition. Suddenly, it's not fun anymore. I've been blocked for days, weeks, months. I stare at my stack of books, my past works, conquests that now mock me like ungrateful children. Shut up! Shut your mouths! I created you! I grab my head in torment. I gulp down the bourbon, desperately trying to anesthetize the demons. The liquor flows down my gullet like the river Styx, but does not bestow the forgetful darkness. It merely amplifies the voices. The voices! The voices! Is there no rest? No escape? I stumble to the closet and reach for my salvation. I see it all so clearly now. I'll follow Papa Hemingway to the happy hunting grounds with a one-way ticket on the Lead Bullet Express over Gunpowder Falls through massive Head Wound Canyon. I raise the barrel with trembling hands to my quivering mouth, standing on my shaking legs on top of a wobbly table. My resolve stiffens as my trigger finger firms. I set like stone as my blood freezes and my heart hardens, petrified. The trigger clicks. The hammer falls. The bullet flies. And the brightest light in the literary heavens is quenched forever. But first, I needed an idea and a healthy advance. As receiving payment for work I had already done had always proved a difficult enough task for me, being paid for work I had not yet done nor had the skill to accomplish should have proven to be an impossible quest. But a journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single misstep. I decided my first work of fiction would be my resume. Russell Hokes, 39 Salinger Street, famous writers' colony, Faulkner, Maine. Home phone, out of order, sorry. Objective. To write a book, other than the ones I have already written, so that I may use my words like a sword of swift justice in the service of truth, but in an easy-to-read, highly marketable way. Qualifications. I am a strong candidate for the position that I am applying for because my words explode off the page like electric action to maximize the impact. That is how I describe my background and strengths. This section is concise and contains action words and should sell my most marketable experiences and abilities. Education. Miss Bronte's toddler time, nursery through pre-K, mastered use of blocks, played well with some. Ralph Waldo Emerson Lake and Palmer Elementary, K through 8th grade, achieved full course of immunizations. Harry Potter High School, 9th through 14th grades. Fiction Club, Nonfiction Club, How To and Miscellaneous Club, Cookbooks Club, Poetry Club, voted most likely to publish a bestseller, graduated valedictorian and salutatorian with honors. Heidelberg University, under- and subgraduate work, areas of foci, writing, English, English writers, and writing English. Graduated magna cum laude and summa cum laude, also received dueling scar. Oxford upon Cambridge, post- and après-graduate studies. Doctoral thesis under tutelage of Scott Turow, Stephen King, Jackie Collins, and the guy who wrote those chicken soup self-help books. Experience. Assistant visiting adjunct associate professor emeritus of best-selling books, University of Bogota, defunct. In the same manner as above, I would like to describe my job responsibilities. I will be concise and remove all unnecessary words and/or phrases, including the specific results of my actions or decisions to demonstrate my contribution. Thank you. Best-selling author. Employer, the public. Guinness Book of World Records. Fortune Cookies, Szechuan, U.S. Fortune Cookies, Hunan, Canada, Alaska. Honors. Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, first runner-up. Nobel Prize in Literature. Missed plane to Stockholm, could have won, don't know. National Book Award. Presenter. Wore my own tux. References: Encyclopedia Britannica. Roget's Thesaurus. World Almanac 1992. Special skills. Typing, making deadlines, being reasonable about rewrites, ability to churn out bestsellers, and juggling. Note to publisher. I include this confessional information about my qualifications for two reasons. 1. Now that I am a legitimate writer, I'm sure we can all laugh at what was, at the time, a gross misrepresentation of my abilities. 2. I would like you to judge this book in the context of my actual experience and not on what I told you was my experience. To recap, I have no experience. My resume was the foot in the door that the rest of my body so desperately needed. I secured a meeting with Hyperion Books. After regaling the assembled editors with details about the world's longest fingernails came the hard part. Selling an idea that I neither had nor was likely to acquire. But, like a blind, machete-wielding explorer on the fringe of the Amazon, I simply plunged in. "Book," I said. "I want to write a book." About what?" they cunningly retorted. Checkmate. As I started to eye the exits, I said, "Knights of the Round Table, does that excite you?" "No." "Then that's not it." I sidled toward the door. "Well, what is it about?" "Guess." I favored them with an impish grin as I felt for the door handle. "Is it about small-town life?" "Daylight?" "Why do you ask?" "Well, we've been considering a series on the disappearing American Main Street." Tiptoeing back to the table. "You're getting warmer. Keep going." "Is it a book about shattered illusions and warmer? Brave lives of small-town residents?" Pounding my fist. "Come on, people. Jump in here. Help him out." "That celebrates what's best in America?" "Yes, you're on fire." "By showing the indomitable human spirit in times of crisis." "Bingo! Jackpot! Ding, ding, ding! You people get me!" With a sizable advance clenched in my tiny fist, I sallied forth to write a book about the small-town experience. I quickly realized that this idea for a book, my idea, as it quickly came to be known in my elite inner circle, fit me like a glove, with the idea being the hand. Well, actually, I suppose I should be the hand, or rather, my hand should be the hand. The idea should be the glove. The point is, my idea was an idea that I actually knew something about. Here was something I could write. I had already experienced many small towns. During my numerous years at the Department of Transportation, I had the chance to spend a large amount of time spending a lot of time in a large amount of our small towns. And often each town's different story was the same. These towns scrambled to exist like a small, helpless animal trapped beneath my foot. It just wouldn't stay out of my geraniums. I've seen communities fold like a gut-shot Oswald, and each time, who was the Jack Ruby? The government. I've witnessed towns die when regulators closed the local arsenic factory, or health officials chained the gates on the mercury dispersal plant. I've seen the hollow, empty eyes of desperate people staggering under the weight of debt and twisting with the agony of poverty. And now I could make money off of having seen that. Finally, a job I was qualified for. My book would be written from the heart, probably my own. I would talk about how the death of small-town America brings great pain to me because I had always had an appreciation for these tiny villages. For who doesn't feel a fondness for a place where you know all your neighbors and you can keep your doors unlocked? Or you could enter your neighbor's home at night because you know his doors are unlocked. I would tell their story. After a lengthy vacation in the Yucatan, that is exactly what I planned to do. Deadlines be damned. I needed some me time. Returning from an ill-fated jaunt in Cabo San Cabo, which included a short but brutal stay at the Hacienda del Polizia, I was a wiser yet poorer man. With that behind me, I took what was left of my advance and began my research for life in small-town America. I decided to hit the library first and was shocked to find the large amount of resource information available and how well-trod this subject was. What I learned made me angry. What I read made me sleepy. Here's what I remember. Small towns are America's most precious commodity behind pork bellies and clean-burning coal. Statistics show that shortly after World War II, America consisted of a lot of small towns. Today that number stands at a little. Tomorrow, who knows? Less than a little? Perhaps a few? One can only imagine how many more statistics could be gleaned from those library books piled in my garage. We know statistics don't lie. Chickens lay eggs. A man is hanged, not hung. Both deer and shrimp are plural. But it came time to find a more experiential experience, one that involved less reading. A statistic I could touch, or feel, or hold. It didn't matter what it was as long as I didn't have to read it. The point is, I hate reading. With the county library hot on my trail, I pulled up stakes and set down roots in my car. With my future in my rearview mirror, I set a course for the past. I was searching for a simpler time, a simpler people. I threw out my anchor and set sail for small-town America. Where would I go? How would I stop? When would I eat? For the first 300 miles or so, I admired my work, the painted center line. Often the solid white, occasionally the double yellow, but most often the broken white. Space line, space line. It penetrates the mind. Dot dash, dot dash, dot dash. Like Morse code, America's vast interstate highway system was tapping out a message to me and me alone. Literally translated from the Morse, it would be A, as if America had something it desperately wanted to say, but was hampered by a pronounced stutter. Still, I heard her loud and clear. America was asking, why did you contribute to a road system that was built to circumvent our small towns? Begun in 1952, the interstate system was, according to Roget's Thesaurus, touted as a panacea for a rubric of our omnibus of catch-alls. In truth, it was a system spearheaded by the military-industrial complex, so that Uncle Sam could move large numbers of troops, tanks, and nuclear weapons. It also added an economic boon to our interstate commerce system, as well as providing an inexpensive and safe means of travel for our increasingly prosperous society. In short, there was no downside. But at what cost? No longer was the traveler routed through what its critics called anemic little tourist traps like Stumphole or Bucolic. These towns and many others became spectral apparitions of their former ghostly selves. Ibid, Roget's. Regarding Ibid, see Elements of Style. I had been on the road for what seemed like weeks, but was probably closer to days, more specifically hours. I needed an angle for my book, but all I had was anger. I traveled from one small town to another, so many that they began to blend into one big town. For each place I visited, I followed a strict research protocol. I'd usually pull in during breakfast time, where I would patronize a charming local diner with mom-and-pop names like Denny's or Shoney's or Denny's. Once there, my ritual was the same. 3 eggs over easy, hash browns, wheat toast, buttered, links if they got 'em, coffee black with a side of cream. Then it was over to the motel for a nap. Rising fresh at the crack of lunch, I wandered the town in search of a story. Always my search would lead me to a lunch counter, where I would utilize my power of observation as I observed myself consuming a Reuben, a plate of fries, a roll with butter, a soda almost exclusively of the cola variety, and for dessert, a buttered piece of pie. As I laid my head in my folded arms, I would try to unlock the mystery of the town. What was its secret? Why am I so sleepy? My God, I can barely keep my eyes open. So it was back to the motel for a little informative television. So many stories, so well told. A large portion of what little was left of my advance went to my pay-per-view research, but they would always cut away before the money shot. Then it was back out into the breach for dinner. A steak, potato usually baked, liberally buttered, and bourbon, the idea fuel. I'd look around at the other diners, thinking there must be a book's worth of material just in this room, if only someone would write it and put my name on it. To end the evening, I'd spend time in a neighborhood drinkery, soaking up the local culture with my eyes and alcohol with my liver. A barmaid would turn down my request for a personal in-depth interview with a gentle protest, or more often a slap. Then it was back to the motel for a little snack and a lot of sleep. Each afternoon, while the complimentary security guard wake-up call was pounding on my door, I would quickly gather up my belongings, check out through the bathroom window, and then shamble to the car. With the remainder of my advance jingling in my pocket and a looming deadline, I desperately needed to make some headway. How I pined for the days of the open road, just me and my paintbrush and our beautiful white center lines. I was in a quandary. What should be my next move? Where should be my next stop? Having no answers, I couldn't make up my mind, but my alternator turned out to be very decisive. Broken down on the side of the interstate, somewhere between hell and a hard place, I spied a charming little hamlet peeking through a pile of used tires. Was this to be my Shangri-La or my Waterloo? I was determined to find out. So, being fleet of foot and swift of deft, I climbed over a guardrail, scrambled down a gravel embankment, and crawled under a rusting chain-link fence emblazoned with a faded sign proudly proclaiming, "Do not enter by order of the Corps of Engineers," and took my first steps into the town. Would I find the fading jewel of Americana? Would I find my small-town Atlantis quivering on the brink of annihilation by an indifferent federal government? And perhaps most important, would I find a rebuilt alternator and someone who would take a personal check? But what and where was I? And who were these people? And how? The answer to the riddle was contained in a clue to its solution. Wigfield, said the sign. Wigfield's hottest ladies. I was intrigued. When was it incorporated? What was its population? And just how hot were these ladies? The first two questions seemed to lose importance after I raised the third, so, to fight my natural inclination not to finish anything I've ever started, I decided to answer the last question first. Unfortunately, the solution required a cover charge, and the mystery remained. I did, however, learn that bouncers are a humorless, violent sort. That left the first two questions. But what were they? I haven't been paying attention. I decided to investigate the town and gather information. Wigfield is a quarter-mile stretch of highway known as Wigfield. It's the kind of place that if a person were in a car not paying attention, he'd probably pass through, never realizing what he missed. Or, if a person were driving through and paying attention, he might drive faster, hoping to ignore what he had just seen. Like a peanut concealed under the street hustler's walnut shell, so is Wigfield difficult to find and likely to cost you $40. As is the case with many small towns, Wigfield is totally isolated, with the exception of the 4-lane interstate that runs parallel to its main and only street. I walked down the road staring into the shop, searching for something in this town to tell me its story. I read the signs hanging in the storefront windows, hoping a tale of drama would emerge. "Dam being torn down sale," declared the first. "Everything must go before the dam is torn down and town is destroyed," trumpeted another. "Pre-flood sale," screamed a third. Then, like a golfer playing the back nine trying to finish before the heavy stuff comes down, I was struck with a lightning bolt. My God! That's it! That's my story! Small towns are a bargain hunter's dream! I scrambled down to the end of the main street. I pulled out my notepad and, like a retiree standing before the chrome spout of a spinning slot machine with her hands cupped, I stood poised to catch the flood of ideas that would surely come pouring out. My thoughts quickly turned to prayer. O Lord, give my hand the added strength and agility to move my pencil swiftly enough to keep pace with my surging vision. Amen. Nothing. Lord, perhaps I put the cart before the vision. Let me quickly rephrase my prayer. First, please give me the surging vision that my hand can't keep up with, then the ability to keep up with it. Sorry for the confusion. Okay, let her rip. Amen. Still nothing. The Lord, like every woman I've ever known, was cold and distant. I started to rethink my breakthrough. Perhaps the fact that this town was a shopper's paradise was not my holy grail. But what then? Time, like a sizable advance a publisher might give you, was quickly slipping through my fingers. Then I looked up into the sky and beheld a giant, looming behemoth. I dropped to the extremely warm dirt in awe, gazing up at this enormous concrete wonder as if it were one of America's famous landmarks. But unlike those unforgettable American monuments, the metal statue of the lady, that big hole in the ground, and the mountain with the faces on it, the name of this one remained shrouded in mystery. Where did it come from? And more important, how did it get here? Was it a natural formation? Or, as seemed more likely, was it erected by ancient alien astronauts who were getting kickbacks from a concrete distributor? Maybe the huge metal letters riveted to its surface would shed some light on the mystery. Alphonse T. Bulkwaller Memorial Dam. Jackpot! A giant concrete dam built on top of a tiny river. The pieces were falling into place. I felt hypnotized sitting in its shadow. Somehow a dam seemed fitting. It represented what I imagined was happening inside my skull, as if there were a concrete barricade erected along my river of ideas, not allowing them to flow. I focused on the dam again. I noticed it was decorated with spray-painted lettering. Perhaps these were pleas scrawled by the townspeople. The words spoke to me as if I were reading them. Don't flood our town. Stop Bill Farber from tearing down this dam. I did Regina at the top in the bottom. Wait a minute. Thoughts were trying to form. The wheels in my skull were turning like millstones, and my brain was the grist. Large dam, small town in front of dam, water behind dam, take down dam equals... Think. What? Remember signs in shops. Pre-flood sale. Don't flood our town. I was so close. Like mold on cheese, a complete idea began to grow. Mold. Cheese. Melty. Cheddar cheese fries. Delicious. No! Must stay focused. Damn! Torn down. Rushing water. Town. Flood. Yes! A small town in peril, threatened by a dam the government is going to tear down. So perfect, as if I were making it up, which I was moments away from doing. Wigfield is endangered. But how? I knew that in order to fully understand Wigfield's present plight, I would have to delve into its past. This decision was partly based on my journalistic instinct, but mostly on the fact that nestled inside a plastic bucket riveted to the side of the dam was a stack of historical pamphlets put out by the Bureau for the Reclamation of Natural Landmarks, the government agency that oversaw the building of the dam. It is this trifold document that I paraphrase here in its entirety. Bureau for the Reclamation of Natural Landmarks. Information about the Bulkwaller Dam. Welcome to the Alphonse T. Bulkwaller Memorial Dam. In 1931, during the height of the low point of the Depression, Senator Alphonse T. Bulkwaller declared his intentions to raise the dam as a testimony to our country's ability to construct monolithic concrete structures in the midst of adverse conditions. The dam was to be, according to its designer, Teddy Bulkwaller, a structure so magnificent that it rivals any creation that God has put on this earth, thereby causing angels to weep with the knowledge that our Savior has been bested. Upon passage of the funding appropriations bill, thousands of unemployable, unskilled relatives of Alphonse Bulkwaller came to the Fresh Springs water basin to build what would become the world's densest dam. Fun fact, there is enough concrete in the Bulkwaller Dam, 4.8 million cubic yards, to build a vertical highway as wide as the dam that would reach all the way to the top. Before construction could begin, however, workers had to divert the Fresh Springs Creek back onto itself. To accomplish this feat, workers began random blasting of the entire area using dynamite. For the next 8 months, workers ignited 60 tons of explosives, leveling the area and displacing enough dirt and rock to feed sub-Saharan Africa. Eventually, a few light boulders were placed upstream in the creek's path, which successfully stopped the flow. Workers spent another 3 months blasting the area, and then building started. The engineer's vision was a simple one: construct a concrete bulwark between the sheer cliffs of the majestic Fresh Springs Gorge. The greatest challenge would be the construction of the cliffs and the gorge. Fun fact: more men died in the building of the Bulkwalla Dam than at the Battle of Shiloh. In the interest of safety, Bulkwalla insisted on using 3 times more concrete than engineers thought was called for. Luckily, the supply of this endless stream of cement was never in question, thanks to the close ties Senator Bulkwalla had established with his own concrete company. Fun fact: the Bulkwalla Dam is so thick and heavy, if it were to fall onto itself, it would crush both its original self as well as its falling counterpart. The first structures to be built were the temporary housing units where the thousands of workers would live during the decades of construction. The laborers were invited to submit housing ideas. These included neoclassical structures with ionic pillars framing large screened-in porches, colonial-style homes, and prairie-style houses with large fireplaces and stained-glass windows. Eventually, it was decided, with input from the senator himself, that each residence would consist of 2 pieces of plywood nailed together in an A-frame and covered with corrugated tin. Fun fact: upon completion of the dam, hard hats emblazoned with the words Bulkwalla Dam were handed out as rewards to any construction workers who hadn't died of head injuries. Before a single foot of the dam could be laid, unprecedented volumes of concrete needed to be mixed. Concrete consists of 8 ingredients: water, crushed rock, loose rock, tiny rocks, pebbles, crushed pebbles, flattened boulders, and crushed loose flattened boulders. These must be mixed in the proper proportions to yield strong concrete. Rock is probably the most important part of cement, making up, after the water evaporates, 100% of the material. A nearby source of rock needed to be found. Eventually, prospecting parties discovered that the proposed dam site was sitting on a sheet of bedrock. Blasting began again. After months of exploding the ground, it was believed that enough rock had been collected to mix the necessary cement to build the dam. Now the workforce was split into 2 groups. One had the job of hauling the many tons of crumbled stone to the screening plants, the other hauling the many exploded workers to a makeshift morgue. Fun fact: Bulkwalla Dam's structural volume surpasses the largest pyramid in Egypt, and its burial chambers are filled with treasures beyond the pharaoh's wildest dreams. At the screening plant, 3 screening towers separated the rock into different sizes: fine, minute, and petite. Anything over 2 inches in diameter was strapped with dynamite and exploded. The crushed rock was then carted by rail to the site in large concrete tubs. To transport the stone to make the cement for the tubs, concrete chutes were used. Flat cars made from concrete conveyed the rock that was mixed to make the chutes. Concrete buckets running on zip lines moved the crushed aggregate needed to make the flat cars. How the rock was moved to create the concrete buckets is a mystery to this day. Fun fact: if all the copper wiring used in the Bulkwalla Dam were laid end to end, it would reach less than an inch. There is no copper wire in the Bulkwalla Dam. The concrete needed to be mixed at water level. Unfortunately, the only water in the area was the Fresh Springs Creek, which had been dammed with boulders, allowing no water to flow to the site. Blasting began again. With the boulders pulverized, the river began to flow. A large supply of concrete was mixed, but before it could be poured, the river needed to be diverted again, and the area dried by a brigade of immigrant squeegee men using rags and sponges to sop up the moisture. While the area was being prepared, the wet concrete was stored at the mixing plant. Unfortunately, in the time it took to dry the riverbed, the concrete had set, so the process was repeated, until it became apparent that there was no way to mix the cement and then dry the area before the concrete set. During these many attempts, the mixing plant became filled, wall to wall, floor to ceiling, with hardened cement tubs of concrete. It was discovered, however, that, thanks to a brilliant stroke of incompetence, the factory was built without a foundation, thereby allowing engineers to slide a set of sled skids underneath the building and then haul the entire structure into the river where it was bolted to the bedrock. Dam complete. Fun fact: if the Bulkwalla Dam was mechanically animated and fitted with a giant robot brain, it would successfully conquer the planet, forcing enslaved...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?